This is Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson. This is New York City Mayor Eric Adams. And this is Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. They are mayors of what we like to call sanctuary cities. These Democratic mayors are freaking out that illegal immigrants are flooding into their neighborhoods. But the reality is that they have no one to blame but themselves. Democratic policies created a monster, and now these progressive havens are reaping the consequences. Since the beginning of 2022, over 30,000 migrants have arrived in Chicago, and over 150,000 migrants have arrived in New York City. Johnson and Adams for months have been sounding the alarm on how this is a humanitarian crisis that will bankrupt their cities. These cities were already plagued with problems: rampant homelessness, crime, cost of living, without adding a foreign population into the mix. These migrants require food, transportation, shelter, healthcare, all on local government dime. Johnson is not coping well.
A governor, an elected official in the state of Texas that is placing families on buses without shoes, cold, wet, tired, hungry, afraid, traumatized, and then they come to the city of Chicago where we have homelessness, we have mental health clinics that have been shut down and closed.
Bowser accused red states of duping migrants to come to her city.
We have for sure called on the federal government to work across state lines to prevent people from really being tricked into getting on buses.
Adams is in denial that the city's laissez-faire attitude toward immigration has contributed to the chaos.
This has nothing to do with sanctuary cities. Migrants and asylum seekers are paroled into the countries. They're here legally. The problem is when you parole someone into a country, you should have a decompression strategy on a national level to spread it throughout the country and not target just certain cities.
Adams argued that the massive number of migrants pouring into our country, violating our laws and national sovereignty, is totally fine. No, the issue is that illegal immigrants are not being spread more evenly into other cities and states. New York City is being disproportionately targeted. In a way, yes, this is true. Why? Because Chicago and New York and Washington, D.C., in addition to 174 other cities and counties across the country, are sanctuary cities. So what is a sanctuary city? It is a municipality that refuses to cooperate with the federal government in enforcing immigration law. Chicago has been a self-proclaimed sanctuary city for more than 38 years. Some Republican governors know that these cities protect and welcome migrants, so they've taken it as an invitation. Governor DeSantis famously sent a couple of planes of migrants to Martha's Vineyard in the Communist Commonwealth of Massachusetts in September 2022. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has shipped scores of migrants on buses to places like Chicago. But instead of changing their sanctuary policies, these mayors have attacked the red states. Adams, in early January, sued 17 Texas charter bus companies. He wanted $708 million to cover the cost of caring for the migrants that New York City has absorbed into all of its boroughs.
New York City has and will continue to do our part to manage this humanitarian crisis. But we cannot bear the cost of reckless political ploys from the state of Texas alone.
According to Adams, busing 33,000 illegal immigrants to the Big Apple is a devious scheme from Texas to assault the city's social services system. Hang on, let's do the math. Adams wants $708 million in damages from Texas. Divide that by the 33,000 migrants who were bused to New York City. That comes out to about $21,000 per immigrant. In other words, Adams wants half the per capita income in the United States to be reimbursed to New York City for every migrant that was bused here. You're telling people in Central America that they can get generous benefits by crossing the border to come here. By advertising these perks, New York City is incentivizing illegal immigration. More lawlessness, more taking advantage of tax-paying American citizens. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The GOP governors are trying to show that this situation is untenable. And for all the complaints from Chicago and New York City, the border states were hit first. If Johnson and Adams and Bowser are overwhelmed this year, Imagine how the border states have felt since the inception of the Biden administration. They were strapped for resources first and by a greater degree. Still, the migrants that have arrived in New York City and Chicago are a drop in the bucket compared to the 2.47 million illegal immigrants that have showed up at the border in 2023 alone. They gotta go somewhere. You said you were okay with a borderless society. Well, you got one. But these mayors never thought that they would have to follow through on the pledge. Let's talk about New York City in particular. Unlike Chicago, it actually went a step further in the 1980s by adopting a right to shelter policy to combat homelessness, the first and so far only major American city to do so. Under this provision, the city is constitutionally bound to provide short-term housing accompanied by support services to anyone who requests it. Now with the migrant crisis, the policy has forced New York City to resort to drastic measures to make good on the promise. The city has put up migrants in ritzy accommodations like the Roosevelt Hotel and even set up massive tent cities in parks. The crisis has stretched the resources of New York City to the brink. After a spring and summer of tent cities and rising crime in migrant communities, the city's leaders have finally had enough. With the backing of Adams and New York Governor Kathy Hochul, the city in October finally moved to suspend the right to shelter provision. Despite this, Adams continues to say that the red state governors are evil.
This is not about raising the attention on an issue. This is a mean-spirited way of using people and disrupting municipalities.
Look, the mayor's outrage is justified in the sense that, yeah, local governments should not be asked to subsidize a national border crisis. But that's the Biden administration's fault, not Governor Abbott's. Texas wants a permanent end to this mess. These Democratic mayors want the mess to continue in the name of international charity, but they don't want to see it or pay for it. For all the tantrums the sanctuary city mayors are throwing, the border cities and states might as well say, cry me a river. The Rio Grande River. Through October and November of 2023, Border Patrol encountered 119,864 immigrants on the Tucson sector of the border, which covers most of Arizona. That tiny sector's 1.07 million people is a fraction of New York City's total population of 8.3 million people. Yet they're no doubt forced to take in way more illegal immigrants for its size than New York City. Arizona, Texas, and most other states did not consent to all these non-citizens in their backyards either. They have no obligation to house them or provide for them with taxpayer dollars that could be going to, I don't know, homeless veterans? This issue could spell big trouble for Democrats come next election cycle. Most Americans oppose providing temporary housing and social services for illegal immigrants in the areas where they live. They also think immigrants crossing the border in droves will mostly hurt the country. This issue is alienating Democrats and independents when it comes to Biden's job performance on the border. We are reaching a political breaking point with immigration. It's immoral, it's insane, it's unfair to the migrant families caught in the middle of this, and I think it means hell to pay come November. Sorry, but the sanctuary city mayors did it to themselves. Next election, we should also kick out the geriatric senior citizens running the country into the ground. For more on this, click here.